All right, so picture this. It's World War II, and the United States military is literally trying to weaponize millions of bats. Yes, you heard that correctly. Actual, living, flying bats. Welcome to this explainer on what has to be one of the most bizarre yet secretly brilliant military projects in human history. Today we're going to dive straight into exactly how and why top military officials genuinely thought an army of tiny, furry mammals carrying incendiary bombs could help win a global conflict.
I know. It sounds completely made up, right? Like some wild plot out of a vintage comic book. You're probably wondering, did the US really try to use bats as bombers? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. The United States government actually dropped $2 million, which was a massive fortune back then, trying to deploy millions of bats dropped with tiny firebombs. This wasn't just some wacky fringe thought experiment. It was a heavily funded, highly classified, and very real military operation.
The wildest part? The idea didn't even come from a top general or a mad scientist. It came from a Pennsylvania dentist named Lytle Adams back in January 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. Adams actually happened to be an acquaintance of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and through that connection, his proposal made it all the way to the Oval Office. President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave it his official stamp of approval, literally forwarding the pitch to his intelligence chief with a memo saying, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea but is worth your time looking into." And just like that, the Bat Bomb Project was born.
Part 1. A bizarre solution to a strategic problem. Let's take a look at the actual strategic hurdle the military was trying to overcome here and why bats were suddenly viewed as the perfect tactical weapon.
So, Japan's wartime industrial cities were largely constructed out of highly flammable materials, specifically wood and paper. Dr. Adams realized something crucial. Bats are stealthy, they're nocturnal, and they instinctively seek out dark, hidden places to roost, places exactly like the eaves and attics of those wooden buildings. Dropping thousands of bats carrying timed incendiaries actually made terrifying strategic sense. The bats would hide deep inside the exact structures the military wanted to target, totally unnoticed, until the bombs ignited from within.
Part 2. Building the bat bomb. The military had the concept, sure, but how do you actually take a perfectly wild idea like this and turn it into a reality?
Well, they assembled what has to be one of the strangest task forces ever. Mammalogists, a former gangster, and Louis Theiser, the guy who famously invented military napalm. Their first major hurdle was finding the right bat. They ultimately went with the Mexican free-tailed bat. Why? For one, they only weigh about 9 grams, but they are shockingly strong, capable of carrying a payload of 15 to 18 grams. That's way heavier than their own body weight. Plus, they were incredibly plentiful. The team found over 20 million of them hanging out in just one location, Nay Cave in Texas. They had found their ideal delivery system.
Okay, now for the absurdly complex logistics of arming them. First, teams had to physically catch the bats at cave entrances using nets on long poles. Then, and I promise I am not making this up, they put the bats into literal ice cube trays and refrigerated them to force them into hibernation, keeping them totally docile. Third, technicians carefully attached miniature, time-delayed napalm bombs to the sleeping bats' chests using string and surgical clips. Finally, they packed them into these cardboard egg crate-style casings to be dropped from B-25 bombers at 5,000 feet. The plan was that as the casing fell, it would break open, the bats would thaw out in midair, wake up, and fly away to roost.
And the scale of this was just staggering. A single sheet metal bomb carrier, which was designed to look exactly like a standard aerial bomb, contained 26 circular trays stacked inside. Those trays held exactly 1,040 hibernating armed bats. Imagine a single bomber dropping dozens of these carriers. You're talking about releasing tens of thousands of armed bats into the night sky over a city all at once.
Part 3. The Carlsbad disasters.
Because, as you can probably guess, whenever you mix wild animals and live explosives, things are absolutely not going to go according to plan. The plan spectacularly backfired during testing in May 1943 down at the Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico. A handler got a little careless and accidentally let some of the armed bats escape. The warm New Mexico sun quickly thawed them out, and doing exactly what they had been trained to do, the bats flew off and roosted in the nearest structures. The massive problem? Those structures were right there on the military base. The resulting fires burned down the test range, an airplane hangar, and even a general's car. Because the project was top secret, base personnel actually had to stand behind locked gates and just watch their own facilities burn to the ground. Unsurprisingly, having your own bats burn down your airfield really kills the enthusiasm. The Army Air Forces started the project in January 1942, but after the Carlsbad disaster, they wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. They treated this thing like a hot potato, passing it over to the Navy in August 1943. The Navy gave it a cool new name, Project X-Ray, and then promptly handed it off to the Marine Corps by December. Ultimately, the entire program was canceled in mid-1944. Part 4, the ultimate what if. But here's the twist. Just because it was canceled doesn't mean it didn't work. In fact, what the Marine Corps achieved gives us one of the most fascinating what-ifs in all of World War II history. The crazy thing is, the Marines actually got the system to work. They ran tests at the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah using a mock Japanese village built specifically for chemical warfare testing. Now, get this. A standard bomb load of the era would yield roughly 167 to 400 fires. Project X-Ray's BAT bombs, they were projected to yield between 3,625 and 4,748 fires per bomb load. It was wildly successful. The bats were incredible at infiltrating structures and starting devastating, uncontrollable fires. Official observers flat out concluded that Project X-Ray was a highly effective weapon. So, if it worked so well, why scrap it? Well, the government had already sunk $2 million into Project X-Ray, but by mid-1944, Fleet Admiral Ernest King reviewed the program and realized the BAT bombs wouldn't be fully combat-ready until mid-1945. That was just too slow. He canceled it immediately because the BAT bomb was being overtaken by a different, much faster, top-secret program racing to end the war, the atomic bomb. Dr. Lytle Adams, our dentist who kicked this whole thing off, was completely crushed. For the rest of his life, he was convinced his invention was the superior strategic choice. He pointed out the insane destructive spread, a 40-mile diameter of simultaneous fires for every single bomb dropped. Think of thousands of fires, he argued. He truly believed Japan could have been devastated, but with a significantly smaller loss of human life compared to the horrific instantaneous devastation of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Which leaves us with a pretty massive historical debate. Could an army of bats really have forced an end to the war, sparing the world from the unprecedented civilian casualties and lingering radiation of the atomic bomb? Or was this entire endeavor, despite those successful tests, just a brilliant mistake, something way too chaotic to ever actually control on a real battlefield? It's a wild question, and the true potential of Project X-Ray is something we're never going to definitively know. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep exploring those unbelievable hidden corners of history.